morning, everyone. I was looking for the appropriate time to interrupt the music, and I couldn't quite get the groove. So thanks for hanging with me for a minute there. I would like to welcome everyone to our City Council study session for the morning of Thursday, June the 4th. I'm looking at the Zoom screen and note that all of our council is present for this meeting. The first item on our agenda, item 1A, is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on a Mesa Cares program that will provide remote learning through technology for Mesa's K-6 students. I know we have a guest with us today. Looking forward to hearing from our new Superintendent of Mesa Public Schools. Congratulations, Dr. Andy Forlis. We're very excited that you're our new superintendent of the largest school district in the state of Arizona. Really looking forward to hearing from you this morning, but just want to say congratulations and tell you we're very excited to be working with you. Why don't we begin, though, with Mr. Brady. Will you kick this off for us?
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Superintendent Forlis, for joining us this morning. This morning is a follow-up from a conversation we started a couple of weeks ago about the idea that we could use some of the CARES dollars to support distance learning for many of our Mesa students, specifically focusing on the kindergarten through 6th grade age group. I've had an opportunity to talk to most of the superintendents whose schools overlap the city of Mesa, but obviously by far the Mesa Public Schools has the significant majority of those students. And I think it would be helpful, and we've invited Superintendent Forlis to just share with us some of the kind of what's changed in the world of education and how important technology is, especially for the opportunity to have devices for the students, and then also the challenges of connectivity. Once she's through, I have just a few slides just to show, kind of wrap it up and give some recommendations to the council about how we might move forward. So Mayor, if that's okay, we'd like to hear from Andy Forlis at this point.
Thank you, yes.
Good morning. I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you and get to know some of you in this digital format. Also want to applaud the great work that you are doing to meet the very diverse needs of our community. As Mr. Brady shared, as school, when we suffered through school closure beginning on March 16th, our world completely changed. We displaced our typical learning environment where we get to welcome 64,000 kids into our schools every day. And so what happened is very quickly, our educators had to change our educational model. And within 2 weeks, we had moved from a face-to-face environment of learning to a digital environment or to a remote environment. And for 7,000 of our children, we were not able to connect with them in the way that we wanted to. 7,000 of our families do not have access to internet, and even larger numbers don't have access to devices. So we had to make a decision on what our educational delivery model was going to look like. We had a choice to make. How are we going to get education into the homes of our children? And so those with devices, those are our 9th through 12th graders, where we have what we call a one-to-one technology initiative. Our 9th through 12th graders take a computer home with them every day. So they had access to a device. Our junior high students and our elementary students do not. We were able to reallocate some of our refurbished devices and get them into the hands of our junior high children. So they were taken care of. So now we have this huge challenge with our kindergarten through 6th graders. And so we were able to deliver education either digitally for those who had their own devices and access to the internet at home, or paper packets. And what happened is what we learned is that the differentiation and ability to serve the needs of kids was significantly compromised through paper packets. So we know that we desperately need to move our one-to-one initiative down to our kindergarten through 6th grade students so that they can access not just the academic standards and the academic learning, but also to stay socially and emotionally connected to their teachers, to their schools, to their counselors, to their social workers. And then we're also learning that our families that are most in need, if they have access to a device and they have access to the internet, they are better able to access the critical services and the social services that are needed for them, especially during this pandemic. One of the things that we have learned is the importance of an email address. So for many of us, we just think you just have an email address. But we have spent hours working with families to garner and show them how to get an email address so that they can access not only educational services, but city services, apply for unemployment, apply for jobs, and so on. So what we see the access to technology and the access to the internet as a huge equalizer, not only for learning, but the services that our community provides to our families and to our students. So I'm sure you have lots of questions, but there's our big, that is the huge challenge that we're trying to solve, is how to put a device and safe and reliable internet into the hands of our elementary students.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Forlis, I know that you have another meeting to get to this morning, as does Mr. Luna. So I know Mr. Brady has more to present on this, but Chris, if you don't mind, why don't we go ahead and go to David now, so that, because I know that on a national level, David's been very active at NLC and in committees on this topic, and has a lot to contribute on this. Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is really important that we can support our education. Certainly, we know that many of our kids in K to 6 are experiencing the digital divide currently. We're having the devices at home. I know that Mesa Public Schools, as well as Gilbert Public Schools, are going to be working with internet providers to ensure that they have access to the internet, and they're also working with a number of nonprofit groups to support their efforts to ensure that kids are connected. This is very important because as we look at the pandemic, it isn't over. It's going to take a while. We don't have a vaccine, so when schools open up in the fall this year, they're going to have to roll out these devices, because there may be students that are going to be taking educational classes at home. So these devices are important. They're important for their continued education. And so this is a great project that I would support. I think that as a community, we need to embrace this because we want to make sure our kids aren't left behind. And it is a great equalizer. Having a device at home, having internet connection at home, having the ability to communicate with your teacher is essential. So I think this is a great idea, and I appreciate the city moving in this direction, as well as the leadership of both Andy and as well as Shane over in Gilbert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Mr. Brady, do you have more to present on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I had two quick slides just to share with the council. And Andy's kind of covered these, obviously. We're talking about setting up an allocation of about $7 million. As you recall, we talked about the possibility that most likely we would not spend most of the business assistance program, so we would move some of those dollars over to this program. Again, we've talked about acquiring the technology that's consistent with the school districts that are in place today. So as I've talked with the different school districts, they have similar programs, but they're just a slightly different, but there's not a significant difference between them. But we would obviously support the existing systems within the school districts. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, well, and we also estimate right now, based on my conversations with the school districts, there's about 9,500 MESA students in grades K through 6, but that does not include Queen Creek. And the reason it doesn't include Queen Creek, sorry, is that as Queen Creek has built most of the schools in Mesa are very new schools, and when they allocated the dollars for the construction of those facilities, they also included devices for all of the students that are going into those schools. So as we've talked to the superintendent in Queen Creek, he's indicated that they already have all of the devices and the connectivity for all their students K through 6. So the 9,500 is an estimate that does not include the Queen Creek School District. But one of the things that Councilmember Luna said that I think is really important that I would like to follow up with is even if we provide the devices, we still as a community, as a city, are very much challenged in the digital divide. The city of Mesa, as a ranking of top 100 cities as far as broadband access, we fall very low and are behind many cities. What I'm going to suggest is it's time for the city to really get a thorough analysis of what it might take for us to look at taking our current fiber conduit and fiber infrastructure that the city already owns and looking at trying to expand that and see what it would take to really deliver services to every home in Mesa. It's a big aspiration, but even if we start in phases and find the areas that are most needed, I think buying a device is great, but then if we take it home and there's still no connectivity, I think that's a challenge. And obviously we've seen how important that is. And so what I'd like to do, what we're proposing to do, is to begin bringing in some professional services to really evaluate what we already have and what would it take to begin to expand that citywide. So that's the part of my presentation I wanted to present to council today. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Council, I'm sure we have some questions here. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, just, I agree. I mean, when we were down on, when the mayor and I were down with Euro Contempo on their ribbon cutting, they were using their telephones and as hotspots for all of their point of sales. And so we're definitely lacking, but that was when I think it was CenturyLink that came in and partnered with the city on using city conduit and using CenturyLink installing conduit and pulling wires, where they really came in and ran the fiber that was necessary out there to get Ray Road, to get the infrastructure in Ray Road. And my only concern, and I agree, so we definitely need to start looking at our citywide fiber and how that's connected and where our low spots are. But with that bullet point rolled under the Mesa Cares, that wouldn't be money taking out of the CARES Act and reallocated for a feasibility study, right? Because my concern is that we had the issue before COVID came up, and we're going to have the issue after COVID goes away. And so would we be deemed by the IRS or by the feds on payback if we were to utilize the funds for a study for something that wasn't caused by COVID?
Thank you, Mayor Councilman Thompson. That's a great question. And that's something we'll look into. If not covered by the CARES funds, I still think this is a really important opportunity for the city to look at. And Council, way I'm imagining it is, first and foremost, that we may, as a city, it may be the most important infrastructure, future infrastructure for the city is to provide for conduit. Right now, we are laying conduit in almost every street project we do, because what the big problem is as providers come to us and want to run their lines, they're tearing up our streets and our right-of-way. So my proposal is ultimately an infrastructure of conduit, and whether or not we actually run the fiber or we have other providers that then lease the space inside our conduit, that is a model I think we should look at. As far as how we fund the feasibility study, I think there's some language that might suggest we could fund this from CARES funding, but if not, I would still recommend, and it's a good point, and we need to be careful with that, but at the same time, if not, I still think it's a worthwhile endeavor by the city.
Chris, do you think there's an opportunity for us to partner with Cox and CenturyLink and have them maybe do a feasibility study of their system in, across Mesa, and then that'll kind of give us an idea of maybe where we're lacking, and then our engineering folks can then come in and identify whether we have conduit in those areas where we can actually do a shared process with Cox and CenturyLink or otherwise, just so that, because I think we may be able to do something internally. I mean, Beth and her group are pretty amazing when it comes to conduit and what we have out there in the street. And I think it'd be great to bring our partners, our utility partners online and kind of look at this from a broader perspective of what do they have in the ground existing and where are the shortcomings at.
Sure. No, that'd be part of the conversation. I think what we're looking for ultimately is a public utility infrastructure that allows any provider then to run conduit through, or run fiber through our conduit, so they're not having to tear up our roads and streets. And that's one of our biggest challenges in the right-of-way management, is we have all these different providers competing and getting in the right-of-way, but at the same time they're ripping up and tearing our streets along the way. And what this would suggest possibly is that we be responsible for the conduit and then lease it to these providers so that we can get to every home.
Let me insert a quick question before Dr. Forlis has to leave. I totally support the goal of long-term citywide connectivity, and I think COVID has made obvious that pre-existing problem that we need to address. But in the short term, Chris and Dr. Forlis, if we help to purchase these devices and a young person is excited to get it and they go home and they're in a bad spot for Wi-Fi, are these devices equipped to be able to function in spite of the bad infrastructure we have in some parts of the city?
So, Mr. Brady, would you like me to take that question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Mayor, our proposal to you, to the City Council, it includes internet access in two different ways. One of them is to provide the funding for the Cox to Connect program. Some of our families, that is a great option. And for others, if they don't meet the credit checks, then we have to work in another direction. And so then the proposal before you before Mr. Brady includes funding for Cox to Connect, but also for hotspots. And then the data package that would go with a hotspot. So we're trying to work around every angle. The other is that the proposal that we have shared with Mr. Brady includes our software filters so that we are making sure that our kids are not going into places in the internet that they should not be, and that it has insurance, and that it provides opportunities for software into our help desk. So expanding a bit on your question, one of the things that we realize in Mesa Public Schools is we do a great job of teaching our teachers and our administrators around technology use. But during a time of closure, what we have learned is our parents need some support. So we have established a help desk, and in our proposal includes the software to continue that so that our parents have access to the help that they need to make sure that the devices continue to work, not just through internet, because that's part of the proposal as well. But if they get stuck, if they forget a log on, if the device isn't good if you can't get into it. So we want to make sure that we have constant help for our parents as well as our kids.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you addressing that before you need to leave. Council, other questions for Mr. Brady or Dr. Forlis? Jeremy.
Hi, Dr. Forlis. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions. Do we have any type of budget allocation? I know that you've spoke that some of these services will be, or some of the dollars will be allocated to different services. Some will be allocated to hardware. Do we have like a budgetary breakdown of how these funds are being spent?
Yes, Councilman. That has been shared with Mr. Brady, who can talk. I can walk you through, if you want me to walk it through, or I don't know, Mr. Brady, if you've got
no, we have the proposal. So I'll just give you the total number for devices is 9,000 devices for about a little over $500. Then she's included, as she said, packages for the hotspots and the Cox, not for all 9,000, but she's brought that down to those who would be short. But the total, once you include all that, plus as she just mentioned, the remote assistance desk, is $6.5 million estimate right now for the approximately 9,000 students.
Okay, and the 6.5. So the other 500,000 then, is that for our? Is that for the study for the feasibility of fiber? The other portion of this?
No, that's just Mesa Public Schools. So then we have Gilbert Public Schools, and they are in need of. They have some devices for K through 6, but they're not able to take them home. And so their number is, this is not the total number of students in Mesa, but the number of devices they need, so then all of the students could take home is just under 450. It's 420, sorry, I read the numbers wrong, 420. So, and then we still have to, and I don't know how many students we have. The only superintendent I was not able to talk to directly, but I think the number is going to be very small, is the Higley School District.
And so as we work with some of these other districts, like Gilbert, obviously Gilbert encompasses much more of a geographical area than just Mesa. Are we somehow limiting these devices so they're only dispersed to students that reside within the boundaries of Mesa, or are we just kind of not, is that not a concern?
Good question. So Superintendent McCord was comfortable with the idea that if we could provide devices for essentially going to only Mesa students, and those schools that are in Mesa, then they would just be for those schools in Mesa and the Mesa students would all have access. Whether or not that happens outside the schools that are not in Mesa, that are in Gilbert, they may not have the same kind of access for a while. They're eventually going to get there. It's just a matter of timing and years. I think even Mesa Public Schools eventually had a plan. They were going to bring devices on, but it just situation challenges have just accelerated that. So I think all these schools have imagined that was going to happen at some point in the future. But so yes, okay. So the number with Gilbert is 420, and it just represents what they need in order for all the Mesa students in the Gilbert Public Schools to be able to take home devices.
And Dr. Forlis, I assume, are we talking about Chromebooks here when you talk the $500 hardware, or is it some other kind of platform that you guys use?
Our estimates, it is much easier for us as a school district to manage one type of a device. And so now our children have Dell laptops, but it is a conversation of, what we are running up against right now is the supply and demand. So placing orders for computers and to have them here by August 4th when schools start, a big challenge before us because we are hearing that there's a lot of backup waiting because there's a lot of school districts that are ordering devices. So at this point, our goal is that we have Dell laptops because that is a consistent device and it's easier for us to manage across our district. If we needed to move to a Chromebook, we could, but our proposal is for a Dell laptop.
Okay. So you guys don't use like the whole Gmail suite then for your students? They don't use like that? We do. Oh, they do. Oh, so you find it, okay, interesting.
Yes, we use the Gmail suite, Google Classroom, we use Google Meets, we use Google Email, so we are a Google district, yes.
Okay, and what's your current, what is your current allocation bid? Do you guys, you guys currently deploy Chromebooks and the Dell laptops, or what have you guys found successful?
Well, what we have found, we have done some of our schools. So, for example, Eisenhower Center for Innovation, they are an Apple distinguished school, and they use iPads because of a partnership with Apple. But other than that, we have learned that a consistent system is a lot easier for us to manage. So we have not done a heavy investment in Chromebooks. Some schools have had some specific grants, but as a district-wide implementation, it has been strictly with laptops, not with a Chromebook.
Okay. Well, again, like I said, thanks for joining us today. I personally think, education is the great equalizer in our society. So I think that us giving these kids the ability to learn remotely when they're otherwise going to be handicapped in that regard, I wish you guys the best of luck with the program, and hopefully this, hopefully you can bridge that gap and we can get some distance learning working and, find a solution moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your support.
Council, other questions for Mr. Brady or Dr. Forlis? Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Forlis, have you built in a platform to where items are damaged or lost or whatever? I mean, once this is a one-time funding source, so I'm sure that you're going to probably buy extras. And with that question, you can answer that, and then I'll switch over to Mr. Brady.
Excellent. I appreciate your question, Councilman Freeman. So I will tell you some of our data. We currently have a what we call that one-to-one implementation from our 9th to 12th graders. We're in our 5th year of that implementation, and we have a 4% loss rate. So we are thrilled. I mean, we have a lot of systems in place that we monitor these devices as very best that we can, and our kids take great care of them. We anticipate, to be very honest with you, we anticipate that number might be a little higher for our elementary kids. So with this proposal, it doesn't include an insurance plan. that we will negotiate with the vendor to make sure that if it's damaged, that we are able to replace it quickly, so that we have some replacement. We have a replacement cycle to get a child a loaner while theirs is getting fixed, and then it comes back. But then we also do plan for loss. And like I said, we plan for about a 5% loss rate, and we are proud to say that our loss rate is about 4% in our high school students. So we have buffered a bit in here for that. I'm not sure what Gilbert has decided, but within Mesa Public Schools, we have.
Okay, that sounds good. And then have you identified certain areas in our city, and this kind of a combo question for you and Mr. Brady, about what areas do need broadband internet, you know, so that could be concentrated for future development and infrastructure?
I think that the right answer is that everybody needs more internet these days, and faster and stronger internet. So when we did a survey, we surveyed our families, and 7,000 of our families came back telling us that they do not have safe and reliable internet. And that's interesting, right? Because you do a survey online. So what happened was everybody that did not respond to the online survey, they got a phone call. And so our data is based on the best way of getting in touch with people who don't have internet. So those who responded, that's how we have identified the 7,000. And that's part of the proposal, is that we would provide funding in this model for those 7,000 who don't have safe and reliable internet, that have told us that. And that's primarily in our most impoverished communities, primarily on the west side of Mesa.
Got it. And I'm sure there's some overlap. I'm sure there's some high school students that already have some of the devices that can be, you know, their families have that, and then there's younger siblings, you know, and families. So there's probably some crossover there.
Yes.
Great. So again, you probably answered Mr. Brady's question, so I appreciate that. Mainly on the west side, and that's interesting to me, because that's our highest density. You know, more. You use the word impoverished area, still areas that do need improvement throughout all that we do. So I appreciate this, and I hope you use the money wisely to help education push forward in our community, because both the mayor and I are products of our Mesa Public Schools, and I barely made it out of there. So thanks.
And look what happens, right? Success. I think you're a success story.
Sure.
You know, but Mesa Jackrabbit Jen Duff also gets that quote. Yeah. That accolade.
I thought of that afterwards.
Yeah. All right, Council, thank you. Speaking of the Jackrabbit, Jen.
Yeah, Jackrabbit has something to say.
Okay.
You said about 7,000 families didn't have internet access. What's the number of families that we're looking at as a total?
So our proposal for Mesa Public Schools is 9,000 devices. And so 9,000 devices for our kindergarten through 6th grade students. So this is a 1-to-1, so every child would have their own device. If there's 4 kids in a family, there would be 4 devices in that particular family. Our survey data came back as households for internet, but individual students for a device. So we've got 2 different data points that we're working with. What we're realizing is that making sure that the internet is reliable and safe. Many of our families responded that they had the access to the internet, but then as soon as their place of work was closed, they were furloughed, they no longer had access to the internet because they were accessing it at their place of work. When many of our restaurants that provided free Wi-Fi for people to go in and sit on a patio and access Wi-Fi, when those were closed, the internet was closed to them as well. So our data is the best that we have gathered based on that particular time. But again, it's very interesting to listen to the stories and dig a little bit deeper. I have spent time at our meal distribution sites talking with families about how they access information and what is the best use to them. And that's where some of these stories are coming from, that said, I had internet when I was able to work at the hotel, but now the hotel has furloughed me. I no longer have internet. So now I'm walking up to the school to see if there's any information I can get for my kids.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories with even public facilities closed down that
Yes.
applying for any kind of access or information was becoming a hardship for so many families. And I'm glad that we're making sure that the children have their own devices, because even though you have internet, there's no guarantee there's a device, a learning device within the household to continue their education, which can have a lifetime effect, as well as a generational one that we're trying to combat all the time. So I'm very much in support of this, especially seeing it come out, I believe, the bucket that we set aside of CARES monies that were under businesses. What we are addressing is that, lifetime opportunity, which starts at a very young age, determine they have the success to build our workforce development. And East Valley Partnership Summit that many of us attended yesterday, we learned that the #1 priority for the economic development of our East Valley and our state was in education and skilled workforce. That's the #1 thing we can do to ensure the prosperity of our lives and our cities and states. So I'm glad to see this happen. I think it ties in very well for our commitment as a city for that workforce development and our Achieve 60 AZ goals. Many of these young kids will be a part of that 2030 goal. So thank you for your work on this, and thank you to the city staff who have put this together, and I think it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Other comments or questions on this item? Well, this is agendized to provide direction, and I think that it's clearly the consensus of the Council, Mr. Brady, is to proceed with purchasing these devices. So I think this is a two-pronged question, though. We need to be of assistance and provide these CARES Act dollars where they're going to have this amazing impact with the schools, but then on a separate track, as Mr. Thompson points out, I think that this has made clear a need in our community for citywide connectivity. So I also sense a consensus from this Council to direct you to proceed with getting the information you need so that we can direct the resources to address that as well.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Council, and I know we have Mr. Luna and Dr. Forlis both have other places to be, so thank you for sticking around for this agenda item, and we'll excuse you now.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your support.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda, Council, is item 1B. That's to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on an update of the Mesa Cares Small Business Assistance Reemergence Program, focusing on the results and award recommendations of the Mesa Cares Financial Assistance Grant Program. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. We're pleased to be here today. As you know, we started this journey some time ago, but remarkably, in a very short period of time, we've stood up a small business assistance program. We've received input about emphasis on small businesses, especially those that did not benefit from federal CARES funding. We've tried to make it local. We've tried to emphasize the need to be able to assist businesses so they can reemerge and continue to be successful. So we've gone through that entire process. We've had the applications up and running. Mayor, Council, this has been remarkable for us to stand a program like this up with so many different individuals and staff members from our IT department, economic development, just across the board. We've had tremendous assistance, our library, librarians who've become the call center experts in helping people walk through this application. So we're here today to present to you the final results and the recommendations for funding for those businesses that met the eligibility requirements. So I'm going to ask Jay O'Donnell to walk us through that presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, Mayor and Council. It's my pleasure to be here today to provide you with the results and recommendations of the Small Business Reemergence Grant Program. And if you recall, this is one leg of a three-legged stool. So there's the grant program, the technical assistance, as well as the marketing program. I did want to make sure that everyone was reminded about some of the major milestones and accomplishments that the City of Mesa has made over the last few weeks. In middle of March, we launched the Mesa Cares website. We also launched the Mesa Cares Business Assistance portal on the 27th of March. Shortly after that, we worked with our businesses to determine what the impact was and where the greatest need was, as well as simultaneously working with residents to determine what their needs would be during this pandemic. And as we gathered all of that information, we were able to develop and put together this small business reemergence program, which we launched May 11th. Coming up on Monday, we launched the technical assistance program. The applications will go live at 8 a.m. And then on the heels of that, we will launch our marketing campaign that will begin toward the end of this month. So we could not do that without a team of people working behind the scenes and really striving to coordinate all of this work and make sure that everything when it rolls out is ready to go and as perfect as it possibly can be. As a reminder, the Small Business Reemergence Program grant was structured and designed to help eligible Mesa businesses focused on paying for up to 90 days of utilities and either rent or mortgage. And it was really aimed at those businesses most affected by the pandemic. Application results by the numbers. So the good news is that we reached a lot of people in and around Mesa with our marketing efforts. There were actually nearly 2,600 people who requested the application online. Of those, 1,882 started to fill out the application. Some of them, I think, were sort of exploring what the application looked like. Some were testing it. But of those, 846 were formally submitted and then processed from there. Of those, 520 applications were eligible, verified, and recommended for award. Those that were not were deemed ineligible for reasons including a non-Mesa address. We actually had a business from Goodyear apply. Some were on county islands. Some of them were recipient of CARES funding already, and then some of the applications were incomplete. Just to give you an idea of where the 500 or when the 520 applications came in, you can see that the first week was pretty heavy with applications, and then it started to trickle down just a little bit over the weekend, and then a steady stream of applications came in that last week, and especially the last few days of the 2-week period. Results by industry of the 520 approved applicants. You can see, as expected, personal care services was the top industry, along with retail, restaurants, entertainment and recreation, professional services, and healthcare as well, because many of the healthcare offices had to close down as well to stem the spread of COVID. The number of employees, we did ask the applicants to give us an idea of what they had pre-COVID to sort of post-COVID when they were filling out the application. And we really did try and focus this program for those businesses who are small. We talked about the expectations that most of the companies applying would probably be under 50 employees. And the actual number you can see were well under that. So you have 237 businesses who had 1 to 2 employees. You had another 128 businesses that were 3 to 4 employees. So 488 businesses total that we're recommending for award have less than 10 employees. And only 31 of the 520 businesses fall into the 10 to 99 employee range, which is still, by the national definition of small businesses, is under 500. We often use 100 employees or less at the City of Mesa to describe our small business community. The majority of applications were filled out on the English application form, but we did have 57 completed in Spanish and 1 in Vietnamese. I apologize if this map is a little bit difficult to see, but I wanted to show you that we did plot where the applications were coming from, and these are applications that are recommended to receive awards. So each applicant is a green dot on the City of Mesa map, and underneath that is the Mesa Business Density Map. So we take the Maricopa Association of Government map of businesses and where they're clustered, and you can see that we've had very good coverage, and I think fairly even coverage in those business clusters. Just to give you a quick idea of verification and how we reviewed these applications, we did have different levels or stages of review. The first level reviewers looked at all 846 applications. They were looking for the eligible industry and business type, looking at whether or not they were a CARES Act recipient. They were validating that the applicant was had a physical commercial address in Mesa. They looked at the W-9s, made sure that they were signed, and also they were validating and matching mortgage or lease documents and utility documents with the business applicant itself. The next stage, or the eligibility phase and award phase, had next level reviewers doing the same verification that the first level review was, plus those next level reviewers also validated and matched the mortgage or lease and rent documents and the utility documents. So those documents were opened, any uploaded documents that the applicant had, those were opened and verified. We were verifying the amount requested and then calculating the amount that was allowable based on the receipts provided. So there were some differences and some discrepancies. So we were basically saying, well, you provided receipts for this much, so this is how much is verifiable. The process identified and verified, this is the process that identified and verified the 520 eligible applicants. And after this stage, they moved to award. So there were 520 applications recommended for funding. The total amount recommended is $4.8 million. Of that, $4.24 million is in rental assistance or facility assistance. The amount recommended for utility assistance is $567,000. The disbursement process will be handled through email correspondence and will require e-certification from the company receiving the grant. So just giving the company one more opportunity to say, yes, all this information is true, correct, and I have not in the interim received any CARES federal funding, so PPP or EIDL. Checks will be—
Excuse me, Jay, I think Mr. Thompson has a question for you.
Oh, thank you.
I do. Thank you, Mary. Jay, going back to the last slide, so we had close to $20 million of CARES dollars to award to the Small Business Reemergence program. Is that right?
Mayor and Council, that is correct.
And so we're only going to award 4.8 million of that 20 million?
So Mayor and Council, this was what was verified on what they submitted to us. So you're correct. That is the amount that ended up. I think what we've seen is, and I think Jay can speak to this, how many of the businesses did actually receive CARES funding. And so I think what this proved up was the smallest companies, the less sophisticated companies, the ones that don't have the relationships with the lending institutions, these were the ones that ended up being eligible for us to assist. And so, and remember, that was just a guess on a number when we had identified 12,000 businesses. But at the end of the day, I think what we see is, because we're really dealing with the micro businesses, that's ended up what the number looks like. And because they're micro businesses, the square footage, the utilities are much less than probably what we anticipated the average would be in the original budget, if you would.
So would we be able to then now go back and maybe remove the fact that you received CARES Act dollars as a stipulation and get more of our small businesses to apply? I mean, I would love to see us spend down all $20 million on small businesses. I mean, that's a pretty significant. I mean, there's going to be another 17 million sitting there waiting to be spent. And if we've got 17 million sitting in a pot, I would love to see us helping more of our small businesses.
Well, that's correct, Mayor, Councilman Thompson, but that's the conversation we just had previously, recognizing a couple of weeks ago that we were probably going to be not needing the entire 20 million. The 7 million we just talked about for education would come out of that 20 million. So that's where that 7 million, we're creating a new program from that. So allocating of the 20, 7 million for the schools. So this is another 5. So you're at 12. So there is some funding available that we can, there's a lot of other programs that we're seeing pressure on, whether it's cleaning supplies, food distribution, and the homeless assistance program. So we could certainly create a new program. Opening this back up is, I guess, one of the options, but this is where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would love to see us open this back up and maybe remove some of the restrictions. I mean, you know, we had 800 and what was it, 846 that were submitted and processed. 520 were eligible, and if we were to remove some of the restraints, maybe that 846 would be eligible, and we could, you know, help more of those smaller businesses emerge. Of course, you know, leaving the restriction in place that they have to be a Mesa business, obviously. But I think if we got the money, we could do better helping our small businesses.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that'll be an item of discussion. Mr. Freeman.
Hey, along with that, thanks, Kevin, for bringing that up. Now I lost my thought. Dang it. Oh, would there be another, Chris, could there be another funding round to identify other businesses besides the ones that have applied? Or are we going to do that? Reach out? Because I noticed by, Jay, your presentation on the dots of people or businesses who have applied, there's still a lot of businesses out there that probably have not, well, I can see in my district have not gotten the word. That probably could have applied. So I'm asking the question, will there be another funding round to address other businesses in our respective districts?
I think that's why we're here to you today, is to kind of show you the results of the program that was put in place and where we stand today. So that's certainly something we could do. Of that 846, there were several that had already received CARES funding. But again, others may not have applied if they read that that was an ineligibility criteria. So that, what we don't know is, I guess the question is, what's the next available allocation of dollars? How much is being committed to the program? We could certainly do that, or we could just take the existing program as it is. I think what we're anxious to do is to award the 520 as soon as possible, because they filled out the applications. They've gone through the last 2 weeks waiting for the award. We could get the award out to those businesses as soon as possible. And then if you wanted us to start another round, and I don't know how much you want to adjust the criteria, we could keep the criteria the same and continue our outreach and see if there are additional businesses that we could pick up.
Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. And to that point, I think when we set that initial, actually $18 million allocation, I think it was really with the understanding that we didn't know, what the outcome was going to be, what the demand was going to be. I mean, at the time we were thinking, what happens when we get thousands of applications? And again, the context we're in here under the CARES Act. The CARES Act was a multi-trillion-dollar funding act, and the majority of that went to the PPP and the SBA grants, and there's already been a fair amount of business assistance that was been funded by the CARES Act, was reflected by you know, we saw a lot of the folks that were applying had already, they were ineligible because they'd already received some PPP or other federal funding. So the money that was then allocated to the cities was really to cover the impacts of COVID on city governments. And I think Mesa, rightfully so, erred on the side of saying, well, wait a minute, we think there's some folks that were left out in the business community. We're going to circle back and help some of these micro businesses that didn't qualify for funding under PPP and the other programs. And I'm proud of the fact that we've done that. But my suggestion would be, maybe as Mr. Brady suggested, is that we hurry and get these 520 funded, and then take a step back and probably between now and December, we're going to do this a few times, you know, assess where we're at, assess how things may have changed on the ground, and to what extent do we need to move things around from that initial budget that we set before we really knew how things were going to unfold. Ms. Duff, and then Mr. Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First of all, on the business assistance program, on the grants, we are funding 100% of their requests. Is that correct? It's not like an amount less than the request?
Mayor, Councilman Duff, let me answer this question because there's another slide here that we need to get some direction from council. The answer is the number that you see, the 4.8 million, makes an assumption that we're funding 100% of the verified. I don't want to say exactly what they requested because we had to make sure it was backed up by the documentation, just to make sure the documentation was consistent with the request. But we've vetted that through and they match up, right? So we have the documentation to make sure that the utility cost and the rent or mortgage are all tied together. So yes, that's what the 4.8 is. What we want to share with council though is there's some of these companies that came in, and you saw the majority of the companies are, what slide is that? Let's go to that slide. Let's go to slide 14. What you see is that we're seeing that we have the majority of our small businesses in that group of less than 4 or 5 employees. That's the majority. But we did have a few that are much larger with 50 employees, 75 employees that applied, but their dollar amounts that they're under the criteria are eligible, but they're significantly high. And one of the questions we had to council is, do you want to create a cap on the total benefit? Because you can see on slide 14 that there's some very large amounts for some of these entertainment facilities that literally had just started up and then had to close down. So they had a lot of expenses that are eligible under the program. But the question to the council is, are you comfortable with that total dollar amount for these few, we gave you the top 7. The median benefit was just less than 20,000, I want to say, Jay.
Median was about 8,000.
Oh, 8,000, oh, sorry, 8,000. So.
An average was 10.
But that was for 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 employees. These have 50. So we were just trying to figure out, does the council want to honor all the obligations even at these significantly greater numbers? Or would you put a cap on it, say no more than $50,000, $60,000 for any one business? So that's, I apologize for taking your question and running with it, but it kind of lends us to, yes, the number you have is funding everybody's request, or at least their verified request, but we are concerned, we want to make sure council understands what that means as far as these very large requests that are in front of us. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. Well, my only concern though is that, and it's not to detract from the education piece or any of the other programs that are going to be funded with the remaining money, but I mean, we had $20 million that were set aside, or $18 million, whatever it was, for the small businesses. And I almost feel like we probably should have seen this presentation so the council could decide what we wanted to do with the remaining money. I mean, again, personally, I mean, I would prefer to run the funding back through and take some of the, I guess, take some of the criteria off, and I don't know whether we should cap or what. I mean, I'm not I'm not pro and I'm not against capping, but I just think there's an opportunity to really help some of our small businesses, even if they got the CARES money or PPP or grants, because I think, maybe they didn't get all of their costs covered or what have you. And I think, just to be fair, that we should probably run this back through again before we decide what we're going to do with the remainder of the dollars. And I agree. I mean, push out this 520 immediately to get these businesses up and running and help them reemerge and become successful again. But we should also still be, looking at the other 300 and something that applied, and what is it that made them ineligible, and what can we do to help them become eligible for additional funding?
Thank you, Mr. Heredia.
Yeah, I was wondering, Chris, is there any restrictions or have you seen, other cities that are doing these types of programs of granting additional dollars to folks that already received, PPP and other CARES dollars through the federal government? Is that happening, or just wondering on us if we do open up, if there's restrictions for us to give additional dollars on that, or it just is up to us to make those guidelines?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Heredia. So again, the 20 million was completely, and I apologize, just a guess. It was just an allocation. There's no magic to it. There's no requirement in the guidance. As a matter of fact, if you look at the state of Arizona, I think I saw their number for assistance for all businesses was somewhere around 10 million. I think that's the same number that the city of Phoenix is doing with their nearly $300 million. They've set aside 10 million, but their 10 million is very specific to a demographic and income or size of business, like maybe a better way of saying it. Tucson's doing a very similar manner. So the 20 million was by far the largest I'd seen of whether a state or local municipality had set aside out of their allocation. And that's why a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned to the council that yes, it looked like we were not going to be spending the 20 million, and that's why we suggested exploring these opportunities for the devices for the students. So of the 20, that's where the 7 was coming from for the students. We've got 5 million for grants, for the grant dollars, and then we have about $1.5 million, $2 million set aside to do the business assistance and marketing plan. So that's kind of how the numbers fall out. But I think one of the things that would be helpful too is to share with you all the programs we have running and kind of where we're seeing the distribution, because some of the programs that are currently under Mesa Cares are spending their money very quickly. There's a huge demand. We still see food continues to be a significant demand, even though we have multiple opportunities to distribute those funds. But so that's kind of where it stands right now today. So we could go back. One of the things we could do, we could go back to the 800 and, what is that number?
46.
46. Now we wouldn't be awarding, what we could go back and find out if there are some of those maybe that did get CARES funding, but if it was no more than a couple $1,000s, then maybe we could go ahead and award those. I think the total amount under the 846 was, how much was it, Jay?
Close to 10.
It was close to 10. But again, you're going to wash out, I mean, people that are not in the city wouldn't receive it. But again, it kind of creates a problem because then others may have chosen not to fill out the application after reading that would make them ineligible if they'd received CARES funding. But some continued to fill out the application, but as we continued through the process, they were deemed ineligible. So that's kind of where we are. And one last point, we also, not that it's going to be a huge number, but we also mentioned, I think in a previous presentation, allocating dollars to our resident companies for the Mesa Arts Center, the nonprofits that are part of that. So we're going to be coming forward with an allocation of dollars for them, but that won't have really a material effect on these numbers here.
Thank you, Councilmember Duff, and then Vice Mayor Freeman.
Yes, thank you. So just to clarify what we're looking at as far as this 20 million that we started with, we have about 5 million here. Then we have about 2 million for technical assistance, right?
Correct.
And the education component that we discussed just a moment ago is part of this, right?
It would be 7. Yeah, 7 for that is what we showed you.
And so that's around 14 million. And then we have the marketing part that we discussed, I think, in last study session.
Correct.
What was the allocation for that?
And Mayor and Council, the marketing was included in the 2 million, so technical assistance and marketing was 2 million, although we'd be happy to take more.
Well, yeah, there's 2 points. So I thought there was also like a city marketing to promote the businesses, not the technical assistance component.
Yeah, the 2 million includes all of that, but as Jay said, she'll take more, but that's the current allocation right now.
Okay, so that's about 14 million. Well, I think as far as the business assistance, I can't say enough how important the technical assistance, I think, is, because those are the things that we need to do to build the resilience in our businesses. Even more things can come ahead in the years. This COVID is probably not over. Whatever we can do to help them to revise their models, to be in the digital age, to be more market savvy, to promote their businesses more effectively, to create models that work for them within the restrictions they have. There's a lot of things that can be done that they need to adjust their business. And I would like to see more dollars or more allocation to that, more so than just handing out cash, which is kind of a short-term Band-Aid, and looking at how we can support them in a way that they can survive any disruption. We also had the consideration of some nonprofits when we first looked at that. So that is another area of businesses that we overstepped last time because we didn't think we had the funds. Also, going back on our slides, we kind of skipped around. On slide 13, yes, I think we should fund right away these businesses. We can't wait any longer. We can't redo that model. They need the money now. The money needs to go to the mortgage companies and to the utilities. And on the utilities, and we're paying the utilities directly, I assume we're just taking that amount that we authorize and making it a deposit. It's not necessarily paying a bill per se. It's saying over those 3 months that you have given us, or it's just a deposit on their utilities that they maybe could use going, say, assuming that they were able to keep up with their utilities, but need that to go forward.
Right, so Mayor, Councilmember Duff, that's correct for city utilities, but remember this program is also available for them to pay for their, for example, SRP or Southwest Gas. So in those cases, we've worked with those companies, but there would be a transfer of funds to them. And to your point on the marketing and business assistance and all that, we'll remind the council, we can certainly increase that because, again, that is intended to be a city-wide, regardless of whether you were successful in this program, we could.
Wow.
Oh, you're coming.
You're back.
I think our generator just kicked on. Okay. Are you there? Okay. I don't know. What did I can't remember what I said. But we could certainly, the technical assistance. The technical assistance will be citywide. So certainly there's an opportunity to increase that. And then council, Jim Smith had a really good idea that if we wanted to maybe go back on the business side and maybe open it up again, maybe with the dollars here, we could do something more on line with just utility assistance and focus on that, because I don't know what the response will be like at the end of the day. But so those are just some thoughts. I mean, certainly we could increase the marketing and business assistance because, again, that's intended to be a city-wide for any business in Mesa that we would provide that opportunity to, and maybe we're shooting low, and again, we can keep these programs running up through December. So there would be maybe a couple of different waves of that as opportunities.
Yeah, I would definitely love to see more money allocated to that. And as we get, towards the end of the year, maybe we consider if we had more monies, which I don't know, I should kind of doubt, monies go fast. But I would really like to see that well supported, more so than anything. So if we could give even a couple more million to that, I think that brings our total to like around 16 million. We're getting really close to that 20 million. And then one other point is when we send out the letters and the acceptance, that we're also sending out a survey of information so we can have the feedback from this first go around.
Okay.
And also use that as information to make decisions going forward.
Thank you. And Mayor and Council, one thought, just kind of build off, maybe we could identify businesses that are not able to make their utility payments, kind of like we do for the residents, and kind of run them through a similar program where we can help get them, provide them utility assistance with some of the remaining funds. That may be a way to do that citywide.
That would be a good, yeah.
Thank you. Council, other comments? Mr. Freeman.
Mayor, Chris, I wanted to circle back. I think there was a discussion about the larger businesses and whether to put a cap on their request for money, correct?
Correct. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Freeman. Yes, I kind of threw that out there and didn't really wrap it up, but it's something we're struggling with, or just looking for some guidance from council, what your comfort level is, because you can see there's a pretty big disparity there in that on those numbers on 14. They're legitimate. We've verified them. They are tied to rent. They're tied to utilities, but they're much larger businesses, large entertainment venues that had large expenses. But we want to make sure you are comfortable whether that full amount should be awarded or should we just create a cap, and like I said, somewhere maybe no more than 50, 60,000, because again, some of these are generating significant employment, so it's much more than the 2 or 3 employees that we see the majority of the applications for. You have some that are 50 and 75, and so we get it, they probably should be getting significantly more. We just didn't know if you were comfortable with these dollar amounts.
Well, just my personal feeling is I am comfortable with those dollar amounts. I feel like if you're in a business and you're applying for the funding mechanism and your entitlement to it, I'm just probably not in favor of the cap because a large business will struggle just as much as a small business. And whether you're 50 or 75 to 100 employees. So that's just my feeling on it. I'm open for discussion on it, but I'm not in favor of cap, and I'll just put it out that way. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I know Jeremy has his hand up, but before I do that, I have thought a little bit about the cap question. And my initial reaction was, hey, if they're eligible, they're eligible, and we don't discriminate, based on the fact that you're a large business, because we don't want to see large businesses fail, any more than we want to see small businesses. But as Mr. Brady was indicating, they have a lot of employees. But in looking at this list, there's actually one of these businesses that has a single employee. And I think, and I've become kind of more uncomfortable with the idea that we would give $233,000 to one business or $110,000 to one business. I think knowing who these businesses are, I think they're fairly sophisticated. They're well financed in terms of investors and banking opportunities. And I think they would be thrilled if we gave them a check for $50,000 or $60,000. That would be a significant assistance to them. And I'm just not sure it passes the headline test. When we're giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to a single business, when this money, as Jen indicated earlier, this money is starting to go fast, and we're starting to need to, to spread the peanut butter a little thinner across town to cover all of the priorities that we're seeing, between now and the end of the year. So I am a little uncomfortable with making awards in excess of $100,000 to individual businesses in this program, and personally would be in favor of a $50,000-$60,000 cap, but anxious to hear what other people think. Jeremy.
Yeah, I want to touch base on that issue as well. And so if I'm reading this slide 14 correctly, we're indicating that these, we're not identifying the businesses, but these are the top 7 recipients of the funds. Is that correct?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, yes, I asked for a report on any of the businesses who requested more than $50,000 in funding. And so these were the 7 that were above 50,000. And if you look at kind of how things shake out as far as what they requested, the total of these 7 are $720,000 in funding, or 15% of the overall 4.8 million granted. And the total number of all jobs reported for the 520 applications pre-COVID is 1,740, and these top 7 grantees represent 216 jobs, or 12% of the overall jobs. Just to give you some comparison.
I appreciate, Jay, I appreciate the perspective. I guess from my, just using some simple math here, that top business that's, and it's nothing they did wrong, right? I mean, but if we fund that top business at $284,000, that's roughly 6% of all of the money that we're dispersing, right? Is my math correct there? So it's we're dispersing $4.8 million. That's roughly 6% all going to one business entity. So I have a huge issue with that, and I agree with John that I don't think one business should get 6% of all the funds. I believe that's excess. The other thing that I think that I heard you say was the average business is receiving about $10,000. Is that correct?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, there are 2 numbers that we looked at. The median is at about $8,000, $7,000 to $8,000, and then the average is $10,000, which obviously these pull the average up quite a bit. And if you are looking for more parity, perhaps there are 2 tiers we could consider. Maybe there's a $50,000 tier and then a $100,000 tier, and that would obviously reduce the percentage awarded, I think, greatly. So it would be much less than the 6%. So there might be a max award of $100,000 and a max award of $50,000 for those who were between 50 and 100,000 requested. We were trying to do the math several different ways and trying to figure out a way to make it fair, and it's really difficult to do that based on business models and number of employees and the square footage. When you look at some of the footprints on these businesses, they are massive.
Yeah, I guess the other thing too, just quick statistics, that $284,000, if the average is $10,000 that we're giving out to businesses, that's like they're getting 3,000% more than the average business that's getting funded. So, I have concerns with not setting that cap because it's just a massive allocation of all these funds going to a top few percentage of businesses, right? And then at the end of the day, the question becomes, and this goes back to an internal struggle I have, but who are the owners of these businesses, right? Are these well-funded investors, millionaires, individuals who can afford to recapitalize their businesses, who can afford to put money back in and take that loss, or are these actual small businesses? And so I don't know, the 284, like I said, I struggle with that concept. And the other thing is, are we doing any kind of analysis as to why these businesses aren't eligible for the PPP loan? Because, the requirements for PPP are pretty loose, right? I mean, you can't be a felon, you can't have claimed bankruptcy. So do we have any idea why these businesses aren't qualifying for the PPP loans in the first place?
Well, I don't think we spent much time having that conversation. We just asked the question. We didn't really have the bandwidth to go into that. So one thought, Mayor and Council, remember the numbers are skewed, and we're very happy with the results of this program, because you can see that while we're talking about these 7, and I wanted to talk about these 7 because I knew that we would have differences of ideas and I wanted to come to a consensus. But even if you go back and look at what we are funding, the majority of what we're funding is an employee of, or a business of maybe 2 or 3 individuals. And so if you use that as kind of where our standard is right now, of three employees, let's say, majority of those, I think, is a fair number, 3. And if they're receiving a benefit of $7,000, then you could, maybe one of the thoughts is we could just cap it at a per capita, per employee cap, using the lowest denominator and getting to a number, I think that number comes out to around 2,300. And then for these larger ones, we would just apply that number to their FTEs, and then that would be the max they could receive. That's just one thought, or we could just create a number and say it doesn't exceed here. But that's why we wanted to have this conversation with council.
Mayor, that's what I was thinking about, per capita or per employee, some type of cap like that after this discussion.
Yeah, I like that idea as well, because like I say, I'm looking at this chart, the one that I'm really struggling with is number 7. And again, we don't know who these businesses are, but just it looks like a startup or something where there's a single employee. And that's if we did set a cap at 50 and we gave this business with 1 employee a check for $50,000, you know, I don't know how comfortable I am with that. And equally, you know, at the top of the chart, I just don't think we can have such a lopsided award to one business, even though we're anxious, you know, to help keep those 50 employees employed. So my personal preference would be a cap of some sort, and I like the idea of tying it to the number of businesses. The problem is I'm anxious to get these checks out the door yesterday. So I'm not sure how quickly we could come up with a criteria to make this cap work. Any thoughts, Jay and Mr. Brady? Well,
again, Mayor and Council, I think I threw out 1. So if we took, again, I'm just doing my math here. If we took using kind of the majority of what we're seeing here as far as you going back to your chart, Mayor, on slide, was it 7? So let's just say, just for kind of be generous, let's say there's 3 employees, 3 employees, and if the benefit is about $7,000, I think when we do the math on that, it comes out to, and we check myself one more time, that comes out to about $2,300. Let's just call it $2,300. So we would award everyone based on their actual expenses, but anything over this $50,000 threshold, then we would just say no more than $50,000, or what your per capita, the $2,300 times your number of employees. And so for some of those, you know, that are 75, they're still going to get, I just want to make sure we're clear, that would mean, you know, even the top one at 50 employees is still going to receive, what is that? Hold on, my calculator keeps going to sleep on me. It's probably about 50,000. What is that going to be? 280 or 50 times the 2,300. So $115,000. So that would be the max that you would probably see going out the door. We wouldn't give them any more than what they're eligible for, but we would cap it. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with formulas on the fly here. So,
are you proposing $2,300 per employee? Or a cap of 50,000, the lesser of the two, or the higher or greater of the two? Help me understand. And I know it's on the fly, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, and we're also having side conversations here, just so you know, so it's hard to keep track of everything. And so I guess that's the benefit or the detriment of these meetings. A 2-tiered cap is a concept where it's both a total hard cap of, let's just say, $50,000 dollars and a cap on based on the number of employees. And the side conversation I was just trying to have there is we want to be careful not to do too low of a number on a per employee cap. Otherwise, the small business that has 3 employees that asked for, let's say $9,000, if we do a $2,300 cap, then it's going to get capped out, right? They're capped an unintended consequence, right? So you might want to actually set the per employee cap a little bit higher, knowing that you have the $50,000 hard cap on the very large organizations. That's going to prevent them from going past that. And so even though the average, when you do the calculation, is 2,300, you might want to put it slightly higher so that that 3 employee, 4 employee business that has you know, a legitimate $12,000 or $15,000 need, you're not have an unintended consequence because of number 7 on this one slide, because you're concerned about it. And so maybe it's a $4,000 or $5,000 per employee and a $50,000 hard cap.
Well, yeah, so what I was thinking is that a simple way to say you will not get a benefit greater than 50,000, or the greater of the 50,000 that you're eligible for, or a cap per employee at whatever, $3,000, $4,000. So whichever is greater that you're eligible for, that's what you'll get. And so there will still be some that'll get more than 50,000, but it's adjusted based upon their employees. So now the justification is, yes, they were eligible for 284,000, but that exceeded the 50,000 cap, so they chose to go with the total, their employee count, and we recognize them at whatever, $3,000, $4,000 per employee. Now, you're still gonna have some that are gonna be over $100,000.
Oh, I was thinking 50 was hard.
Yeah, unless the council just wants to create a hard 50, then we'll figure it out from there. I guess that's when
I'm in favor of the hard 50.
Okay, so
I know Mr. Thompson has a comment. I like the, we're going to have to have a vote here at some point. I like the hybrid that you're proposing, where we say no one can get more than 50, but we'll add a multiplier if you have, for businesses that have significant employment. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, so like on the slide 14, on the number 2, the restaurant, it says projected. Is that what they're projecting for the number of employees?
Tell that story, Jay.
Mayor and Council, yes. So this is a business that had a lease agreement signed in the fall of 2019. They were working on tenant improvements, very large floor plate. They had hired employees and were ready to open starting April 15th. And then COVID hit. So they weren't able to actually open, and they're doing an opening in June, or this month, in a week or 2, and so they'll be ready to get up to speed, and their projections are actually 100 jobs, but 50 of those are part-time. That's why we did the full-time equivalents, or 75 jobs.
Okay. So we actually kind of do know who these businesses are, correct?
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, because we have to have receipts, we have to have documentation. I mean, these are all under our criteria, are legitimate expenses under what we outline. But again, the magnitude of it, we felt like we need to have this discussion with council.
So who is number 1?
Well, before you answer that question, frankly, I don't want to know, because I don't want to be accused of favoritism.
But I think it's important, because are they, when you look at a small business, is it franchise? Is it a true small business, an entrepreneurial thing? They're trying to expand their business, and all of a sudden COVID hit. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential criteria that we could put in place. I mean, not to detract from the program. I agree. Let's push the money out to these 5, 20 or whatever, as quickly as we can to get them going. But just for future reference, I guess.
And we'll be glad to share those at some point when the council, but I can tell you these first 2 were, as you heard from Jay, one that was eminently going to open and wasn't able to, and the other one is brand new to the city and has made a large investment in entertainment and restaurant space. And again, they were significantly impacted by they literally, obviously had to shut down.
Well, and I like the fact that they're bringing jobs. I mean, to me, that's the number 1 thing, right? Because we want good quality jobs in our city for our citizens. And, you know, and if we can help a business that was looking to expand or otherwise, I think it's a good idea.
Councilmember Duff.
Also, I'd like to point out that, you know, a lot of these dollars there's a ripple effect. A lot of these dollars, if we're paying directly to the landlord. So we're talking about the business, but if we choose not to also fund the business, and I'm open to the models, I'm not debating anything, but the consideration also that we're talking about these businesses, but if they have a landlord, then we impact that business as well. You know, so we're funding directly to the landlord. So we're talking about the business. Yes, they can go out of business, but then we have the double whammy of a landlord or a utility being hit, but especially a landlord, which are sometimes small business owners as well. So I'm interested in these two models. I'd like to see them side by side, really, and digest it. I know we need to work quickly. I don't know what the best way. I'll leave that to any suggestions.
So Mayor and Council, I don't want to put you in a very uncomfortable spot today with this. Would it be okay if we move forward with I don't know, I guess it wouldn't be a problem to move forward with everything else? Yeah, so we're assuming everything else is 50,000 or less. If we could move forward with those notices and getting those awards out and maybe return next time and just kind of talk about this group, would that be, I apologize, we just wanted to bring this to your attention, and if we need some calculations and putting on paper and give you more time to absorb it, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, so we could do that, but if I could at least get direction to allow us to get the benefits out for the other businesses, I think that would be helpful.
I have a comment on that.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
So my concern is, I see what you're saying, Chris, to get the money out as fast as possible for the businesses that are under that 50,000 threshold, if I'm hearing you correctly. But I think we have to put a cap on the number. We need that per employee cap put on there somewhere, because if number 7 is 1 employee and they're applying for $52,000, is number 8 $49,000 and they have 2 employees or 1 employee? So, I mean, given that we have no idea what the rest of this list looks like, I think we should move forward. It's my opinion we should move forward to get the money out for the under $50,000 businesses with some type of cap on a per employee basis.
Mayor and Council.
Can I go ahead and make a motion just for purposes of moving the discussion along? I'm going to move that we instruct staff to go ahead and issue all of these awards up to $50,000, and that we put on the agenda for next Thursday, making additional awards to businesses in excess of $50,000 based on a formula tied to the number of employees. Okay. And then we can continue this discussion and look at 1 or 2 models. And see, you know, getting actual numbers as to, well, number 1 in that case would then get, you know, 103,000, or just so that we're comfortable. But I'm sensing consensus that everyone's okay with issuing checks for $50,000 to these businesses. The ambiguity arises when we start analyzing how much above that ought to go.
Yeah, before we vote on that, I just want to be clear. I'm not okay with that unless there's a per capita cap on the businesses under 50,000. We have no idea if the number 8 business is 1 employee and they're getting $49,000. I think there needs to be a cap put on that money under the 50,000 as well.
You want to cap it at less than $50,000?
No, I'm saying you can cap it at 50,000, but there has to be some other type of formula that adjusts per employee. If in your previous comments you said you have issues with number 7 because they only have 1 employee and they're getting 50,000, I guess what I'm saying is if we issue everything under 50,000, business number 8 that's not on this list might also just be 1 employee, or business number 9 might be getting $40,000 and might just have 1 employee. So I think there needs to be some type of per employee formula that's tied into that under 50,000.
Mayor and Council.
I think we might be saying the same thing, but Jay, go ahead.
Mayor and Council, I just wanted to make the comment that we developed this program specifically for small businesses, and all of these businesses that we're funding have less than 100 employees. So they are small businesses. And what we laid out was a program to fund rent or a mortgage payment for 90 days, and then utilities for 90 days. We purposely did not tie it to employee counts because the verification on that was going to prove to be somewhat more difficult. And I will tell you that the verification process for utilities and the verification process for rent and reading through pages of lease agreements and finding signatures and the escalator clauses, all of that due diligence has been completed. So these are expenses that are valid, and they are not tied to employee count at the moment. I think we can come back and make a recommendation next week, as early as next week, on these 7. The only reason we pulled these, it had nothing to do with FTEs. I just wanted to do a comparison, but the only reason we pulled these was because they were requesting over $50,000, which when you think about running a business in today's environment is, I think these expenses are not completely out of line. I mean, a restaurant to have 3 months of utility and rent assistance for $110,000 is not astronomical. So I think we can come back with a recommendation either in a tiered category or a cap, but give us a few days to figure that out and make sure that we're doing this in a fair way.
So Mayor and Council, also think about it, a small business. If you're a small business and you have a retail storefront, say you're selling a product or good or have a little restaurant, you may have very small space. But if you are a small business running a catering hall that has 4 or 5 times that amount, but you're still a small business, but you have to pay rent on a banquet hall, that's where you're going to see big discrepancies, because we realize all businesses are not the same. They have much different overhead and businesses that they associate with. That's why we stayed away initially from the FTE count, because that's really not necessarily a good indicator overall. But I think after the 50,000 and just dealing with these 7, we could figure out a formula to bring back to you at a future time.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Mayor, I'll second.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Freeman. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to second your motion to move forward with the discussion or a vote.
Okay, so I think this is to some extent kicking this can to next Thursday. I think that the one area, again, that where I'm sensing consensus is everybody ought to get up to 50, and then I think we're very open to people getting more than that. We just need to tinker with how to calculate that.
Okay.
And so there's a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion on this?
I apologize. What are we voting? I'm not sure which motion was
Sure.
that we're voting on.
Well, the motion is to fund all 520 awardees up to $50,000. And to next Thursday to discuss making awards in addition to $50,000 it might just be these 7 businesses. I don't think anything else is required. The award is recommending an additional or in excess of $50,000. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. And so we would award everyone, even these 7 to 50,000, they'd get that going out now. We'd come back and discuss whether or not you wanted to go above, if there's a formula or intent for the council to go above the 50,000, and obviously these 7 are the only ones that would be eligible for those additional dollars, but we can come back at a later time for that.
Yeah. So I think we're prolonging this conversation for these 7, but getting checks out the door to everybody, including these 7, for $50,000 is the motion. Okay, so there's a motion and a second. We'll need to do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Freeman.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitaker.
Nay.
Thank you. Councilmember Heredia.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Duff.
I just want to clarify that it is for all businesses, including a minimum of 50,000.
Correct.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Luna is excused. Councilmember Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you, and I vote aye. So that's, now I got to do my math. 5 ayes and 1 nay, with Councilmember Luna absent. So that motion passes, and we'll continue this conversation next Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Brady. I know we just voted, but is there anything else under this agenda item that we need to discuss or hear presentation on?
Not on the business grant. I think we're good. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda then is item 1C. That's to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the proposed 2020 Mesa Moves Transportation Bond Program. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we quickly wanted to bring back, just to get more familiar with the process and the projects for the Mesa Moves Transportation Program. We're pleased to come back to you. We've really tried to work with the direction we had from Council before to try to maximize the opportunity to recommend projects to be funded with the bonds, and then also using those projects as an opportunity to leverage additional dollars for the city for the reimbursement. So we have quite a panel here to present to you. We have Scott Butler from our budget office, and RJ Zeter, our transportation director, and Erica Darian, also a deputy director with transportation. So I'll turn it over to these gentlemen.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'll kick us off. So this morning we're here to provide you an update on the council discussion about a potential 2020 bond question. What we have today is what is a comprehensive look at a multimodal transportation program to address not only the needs that have been discussed in a potential bond question, but also to address some of the other opportunities across the city. I'm going to let RJ and Eric discuss the details of the various projects, and I'll be here to answer any questions about the financial side and also provide some additional information on that.
Mayor, members of the council, good morning. As you recall from our previous conversations regarding the potential bond election, should council authorize a vote, we have identified 10 what we're calling priority regional roadway projects that would then free up some additional money should council approve. So the cost of those regional 10 roadway projects is estimated to be $97 million. 2 large examples that are currently in the design stage is Signal Butte from Williamsfield to Germain Road. And as you're aware, the town of Queen Creek is pre-funding the section of Signal Butte from Pecos to Germain, and the city has just over 10 years to reimburse Queen Creek with no interest for the cost of that portion of the project. In addition, we're currently in design on a section of Broadway Road from Mesa Drive to Stapley. I think it's actually the Swear to Spur, if you want to use the exact streets, but just to kind of put people understanding generally with arterial streets, that's where that's at. So also, as you recall from prior conversations, should council authorize the vote of a roughly $100 million bond election to go forward, that would allow the city of Mesa to receive reimbursement through the Arterial Life Cycle Program that Maricopa Association of Governments manages, and that would bring in just over $63 million in reimbursement for these projects. Arterial road reconstruction, again, we've discussed this. We have a number of streets throughout the city that are reaching the end of their useful life. So this is the point at which just a 2-inch mill of the surface asphalt is not enough, that we actually have to go down to what we call the subgrade and rebuild the roadways. So a couple of examples, a portion of Greenfield Road from Southern to Brown and Southern Avenue from Alma School to Extension are 2 examples of roadway sections that we would look to reconstruct. And the cost estimate in total that we would recommend within the total program is $45 million. Active transportation, this is a term you'll hear at MAG. So we were kind of joking about this a little bit yesterday. I told Mr. Brady that his legs are a self-propelled device, but any self-propelled human-powered mode of transportation. So you've got a couple of pictures just to show some examples of some projects we've recently completed. The top picture is the consolidated canal, and then the bottom picture is the project we completed a couple years ago, the stadium connector path, where we show a separated bike lane. So the thought with the active transportation projects is that we would use the reimbursement funding, and Scott can talk a little bit more about that as we proceed through the presentation. But rather than identify specific projects right now, we would have funding identified, and this would allow us over time to work with the community and identify projects that would make sense in expanding our multimodal I just lost my train of thought, sorry, would allow us to, proceed with expanding our shared youth paths and separated bike lanes. In total, the Mesa Moves Transportation Program would add up to $162 million. And again, this is because we are able to leverage, in addition to the bond funding, should council authorize a vote, it frees up or allows us to receive reimbursement, through MAG for over $60 million. So, the point we're trying to make is that for a $100,000 investment, $100 million investment in bonds, we actually are able to move forward with a citywide transportation program that totals $162 million. So we think there's a great return on the investment. That we would see, a 60% more, coming back, if we're allowed to move forward with these projects. So again, there we go, leveraging the $100 million and receiving an additional $62 million back in reimbursement. And again, within the Mesa Moves program, we've identified the 3 major categories: regional roadway improvements, arterial reconstruction, and active transportation.
So, Mayor and Council, just a little bit more detail. There's a list that was provided as an attachment to the agenda item that lists out the regional roadways and those major intersections that we're proposing to fund in the bond program. It allows us to leverage the bonds to receive those reimbursement dollars that RJ noted. And then deliver the rest of the program. So in terms of the funding for those ALCP dollars, that's kind of the key. You can see that on this slide, there's a schedule that shows what the current Maricopa Association of Governments ALCP schedule reflects. So as we spend the bond dollars, it allows us to receive the reimbursement dollars. It's not a situation where we're waiting for the project to be completed in order to receive the reimbursement, but rather what we do is we submit a quarterly reimbursement based on progress on the projects, which allows us to receive the money as we're going. And so as we're completing the roadways, it allows us to receive the funding to devote to the other 2 categories that RJ noted, the arterial reconstructs, as well as the active transportation projects.
So I want to make sure you can hear me from here, or there we go. So I just want to talk a little bit about schedule and what effects the bond has. We're talking about a 5-year schedule starting in calendar year 2021 and going through 2026. Well, we have some slides to talk about utility improvements and how that's involved with street funding. And then also the federal requirements that we are tied to some of these projects and other regional requirements. Also, just so you know, all of our CIP projects that we plan do have an operations and maintenance cost associated with them that we build into the CIP so that we know that we can fund them and maintain them once they're open. We like to talk about streets and the asphalt and the vehicles and people moving on them, but there's a lot more that's involved with street projects. All the utilities that are involved. You know, we talked about fiber conduits earlier, but water, sewer, and then we have the third-party utilities also that need to be coordinated with these projects. So we'll be looking to do that. We've had some initial conversations with our internal departments as we begin design of these projects. We'll also be reaching out to the likes of SRP and CenturyLink and such. So additional funding for any sort of utility upgrades or utility improvements will be identified with these projects. And that obviously may impact schedule for a few of these projects so that we can get the utilities put in before we pave. Want to just touch base. We have two different types of funding that will be involved in this process with the ALCP funding from MAG. Most of it is the Proposition 400 regional sales tax, but we have two projects that also MAG receives federal funding that gets passed through to the cities. We have two projects in this list, the Signal Butte Road project from Williamsfield to Germain, and also the Elliott Road project from Ellsworth to Sossaman, that both have federal dollars associated with that. What we wanted to show with this slide is when you have federal dollars associated, it takes a longer time. There are more clearances and steps that we have to go through during the design process and even the construction process to get things verified. So a typical roadway project will, from the beginning of design through opening day, typically takes 3 to 4 years. You add another year to 18 months on that with the federal process. So to, I think, then highlight, we'll talk about each one of these three groups, but the regional roadway improvements, you know, we've identified the 10 projects. We have 2 projects that are currently under design that we would just like to move forward, you know, with construction as design finishes, the Signal Butte project and then the Broadway project that RJ talked about. These are fairly complex projects. We've been working with the utilities already, and with our other projects, we'll work closely with the utilities to make sure that we can get the project complete, and but the schedule may change slightly. After the election this fall, we'll come back to council with a more detailed schedule for these projects. As far as the Arterial road reconstruction projects, part of the $45 million would be included in the $100 million bond. There's about $11 million of that, and then the remainder would be funded through the reimbursement process. That's why, as you look at the schedule here, there's more funding for Arterial reconstructs towards the end of the program in fiscal years 22, 23 through the end, because we need to get those reimbursements back to start to ramp up this program. And then the active transportation program, as RJ stated, we would go out, and we're seeking some more community feedback on a list of projects, identify those projects and bring them back to council.
I did want to make one note regarding the federal funding, although, you know, you saw the slide that talked about the additional time that is required to, you know, get a project complete using federal funds. Beth Huning's staff is what's called a certification acceptance agency, and as opposed to having the state oversee our projects, we're able to self-certify a great deal of both the design and the construction process. So even though it's longer than if it was just local or regional funding, by having been approved to self-administer our projects, it's actually much quicker than if we went through the state. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, RJ and gang, for this presentation. I love the fact that we can leverage a $100 million bond and receive an additional $62 million in regional funding from MAG or whomever. I think it's pretty awesome that we're able to do that. And I just want to, for my colleagues, I just want to point out slide 11. This is exactly speaks to the point that I was trying to make previously when I brought this up for consideration is that it's a lengthy process from the moment the bond is approved until you actually have a finished product. And if we would have waited 2 more years to put something out on, put a bond out for on the ballot, it would have been probably another 6 to 7 years before we did any roadway improvements or over anything else for our roadways for our citizens. So, so thank you, RJ, and everyone, Eric and Scott, for the presentation. Love it.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Whitaker.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Kevin's comments. Thank you guys for putting this together. I think it's a no-brainer as far as this return on investment goes. You know, the reimbursement from MAG, I think, makes this essential. So thank you guys for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. Council, other comments? Councilmember Duff.
Thank you for the presentation. I agree. It looks like a good program, but I'm trying to tie it into the $100 million that we approved, was it last week, for the bond. So this is a $162 million program, and then we're doing a bond of $100 million. So is there a list of, this is more dollars than we looked at last on the $100 million? So is there a list of projects of what this is, or is pending, or I'm kind of confused.
So, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, thank you. What we did it after last week, I asked the staff to go back and find every regional project that was in that list of the 150 million that you saw last week. And I said, let's put those up first. Let's fund those with the bond funds. Because then we recognize, and there were a few others on there, that in order to maximize the reimbursement. And remember, this reimbursement we're getting is actually the sales tax that Mesa residents are paying that goes to the region. This is getting our dollars back. So what we've done is, I think we might have added that we have all those lists of regional projects, which is probably a little bit more than what you saw, but we've also included what we call city share. You notice that there's an attachment or a document you got that has the list of all the regional projects that was, I think it was a separate item than this actual presentation. That will give you the list of all of the regional projects that are being, when we talk about the 10 regional projects.
I have that up right now. If
I don't, do they see it? I don't see it. I don't know if they see it.
They may
So
not.
there's a list of regional projects, there's 10. And then you'll notice at the bottom there's a description called city share. Eric, why don't you explain what city share is and the amount that we've set aside? We have to do this every time we do a street program, but go ahead and explain that.
Sure. The city share program is that as new development comes in, the city requires that that developer build the street that is directly adjacent to their property. Typically, we're talking arterial streets when they're, and so let's say Power Road is a 6-lane arterial street. If property comes in on the east side of Power Road, they're required to build essentially the 3 northbound lanes in front of their property. In city code, we require them to build 24 feet of asphalt. That's what we ask for. Well, 24 feet doesn't get us the 3 additional lanes, so the city has to come in and pay a little bit extra so we can all get it built at once. We want the roadway to all be built at once, so we provide that to the developer essentially to finish off that required section of roadway.
Oh. And then the city share that we've allocated for this program is how much?
It's $4 million.
4 million. So of the 97 million, 93, wait, tell me, Scott,
yeah, so,
correct me.
So maybe we can look at this in terms of the $100 million that's being proposed as part of the bond program. The regional roadways that are on that list, if you exclude Signal Butte, Pecos to Germain, because as RJ mentioned, that's the roadway that's being funded by the town of Queen Creek. And then we also exclude the city share program. Those other roadway projects, those add up to approximately $89 million. And those $89 million, that's what's giving us the $63 million in ALCP and federal reimbursement. And then what we did was we added The early projects that are identified as arterial reconstructs, and I think Eric mentioned that it's about $11 million. Between those two groups of projects, the regional roadways for 89 and the early start to the arterial reconstruct program adds $11 million to get us a $100 million bond program.
So council, we may have confused you just a little bit, but we're trying to, I guess, now create the package that would go to the voters. And we thought it would be maybe easier to sell the entire package of the regional transportation projects as the majority of the 100 million. When we showed it to you last time, we had some in the 100 million and some in the 150 million. But now kind of going back and seeing the leverage that of 100, well, it's $88 million in regional transport. If we put all those in the $100 million bond program, that sends a message that by approving this, it's going to leverage another $60+ million. So we've essentially taken those two graphs that you had before, those tables with all those projects, and now we've kind of repackaged them where we think that we can explain, here's how regional projects, let's put all the regional projects in the bond program along with city share and some of the arterial. That'll add up to 100 million. And then we can say that 100 million will leverage $62 million for the other arterial projects and active transportation programs. This is just our way of thinking, a way of really being able to show the leverage that comes from the regional projects. So that's we've repackaged this a little bit, but we wanted to really highlight the opportunity that the 100 million, what it can do for the entire program.
I get most of that. I'm still looking for what is a total list that we're looking at. I mean, it's more than the 100 million as far as what the projects are.
Okay, yes. So go to slide, hold on, let me see. Let's go back to slide, let's start with slide 6, I guess. And then you see the three broad categories. In the $97 million, I think we just explained, in the $97 million, there's 89 million for these regional transportation projects that are MAG approved. We know the projects because they have to get on the list at MAG. We know the scope of the project, so those are already identified. There's $4 million for city share.
Yes.
And then there's another
$4 million for reimbursement to Queen Creek.
Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Wait, so of the $97 million, $89 million of that is for the regional roadways that are eligible for the MAG reimbursements. And then what we did was we took the early stages of the Arterial Road reconstructs, which is $11 million. And that makes up the portion of the bond program. The $4 million for city share, we're actually proposing to use the regional reimbursements in order to meet the city share program obligation.
And then we don't have a specific list right now. We can give you examples for the arterial road construction, or at least those that are, I guess what Eric would say, are in need of reconstruction, and those are all over the city. And frankly, it's a way of kind of balancing out the regional projects, which are typically kind of weighted towards the new roads and construction of new projects that most likely are in the high growth areas of the city. And then having that package, but also then having the arterial reconstructs, which allows us to go into the older parts of the community where the pavement's been down for some time and go in and reconstruct, essentially providing them a new road. But they're not eligible, they wouldn't necessarily all be eligible under they're not even in the list for MAG. So this is our way of having our local reconstruction programs that we can do in other parts of the community. That's what happens under arterial reconstruction. And then there was obviously a great interest in the active transportation projects around the city. I think we've given you some examples previously, and what we're suggesting is we'll keep bringing those projects forward. But our experience has been that when we get ready to launch into these active transportation programs, we need to have a good conversation with the adjacent community and those who are interested, because we've had some projects that where we assumed we had support and we've run into some challenges. And so we're just saying we're going to set aside $20 million for those programs. We have, similar list to what you saw before, but we need to spend some time working with you and the community to make sure they're accomplishing what everybody would like to see happen. So we didn't provide a specific list, it's just an allocation of dollars for those purposes.
I see. Okay, well, thank you. And I would like to also advocate for when we do reconstruct streets, that we make them complete streets, walkable, bikeable, the elements that we missed possibly early on when they were originally designed.
Okay.
Thank you. Jeremy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I got a quick question. I know that in the past, I want to say it's for the park bonds. When we put the park bonds out to the voters, I know that future councils have the ability to change the allocation of those funds. Is this transportation bond the same way in the sense that we could decide what projects we want to use it for, but that could change it at any future point depending on the council at that time?
Mayor and council, I think the answer is correct. They would have that discretion, although the regional projects are, I guess they'd have to choose not to do some of the regional projects, but because the regional projects are already on a list that has to go through some approval process at the region, and they have to meet certain criteria. So other than, I don't know that they could choose not to do some of those projects, I guess, in the future. And whether other projects maybe would come eligible, I guess that's a possibility. But this list of projects have been out there for some time on the regional projects. The arterials, certainly, staff would, like it would normally do, would come to you with a pavement, kind of condition of these large arterials in the city and say, these are the areas where we see the greatest need for improvement, but certainly council will have the discretion to discuss and debate about whether those list of priorities are consistent with your thinking. So they would have some option to make those decisions. The benefit of not including most of the arterial reconstructions in the bond funds is that it allows us maybe some more flexibility because most of it's being funded by a reimbursement. So we will have some flexibility about how we spend those dollars. And then again, the active transportation, it's intentional to give future councils after if this is approved, the opportunity to work with staff in identifying priorities for these self-propelled, types of transportation would work best for bikes, for pedestrians, multimodal opportunities on canals or on major streets or along streets. So we think that's an opportunity for future discussion with the council. So yeah, we assume there's going to be future council involvement in those discussions.
And Mayor and Council, maybe it's worth noting, because when we come to the call for the election on the 15th, to Councilmember Whitaker's point, it is a general statement that you put on the actual election. And so when we come, and that's how we've done it for a number of years. And in fact, even when you look at the publicity pamphlet, it's a general statement about the type of infrastructure that the improvements. But the city also then provides an additional informational pamphlet that describes the specific type of projects that are anticipated to be coming. And really to Councilmember Whitaker's point is that really the public then holds the council accountable. And I can only think of, in my time here, one project particular that was identified in a previous package that ultimately wasn't moved forward. And it didn't move forward because it required property acquisition that the city was not able to acquire. And so therefore the council, after extensive conversation, decided to not move forward with that particular project that had been identified in the informational package. And so there still is a very high level of accountability in the future to future councils, because council, this information that you're looking at now will be provided to the public, and future councils will have to struggle with if there's cost overruns or if they're not able to acquire a particular piece of property for some project. So there is accountability in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Council. Other discussion on this item? All right, obviously the consensus is to move forward, and I'll just add my amen to I love the idea of going to the voters and saying if you approve 100 million in bonds, you get 162 million in street improvements. I think that's a compelling campaign. So thank you for the additional information.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll be bringing the formal bond call, I'm not sure, what's it called? Resolution to council on June 15th. So that'll be your next action to get that set for the ballot in November.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda, council, is to acknowledge receipt of minutes of various boards and committees. Is there a motion? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Freeman. We'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Freeman.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitaker.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Heredia.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Duff.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Luna is absent and excused. Councilmember Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes unanimously with Councilmember Luna absent. The next item on our agenda is current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Who would like to go first? I know we just met a couple of days ago, so maybe there's not a whole lot to update. Yes, Councilmember Duff.
Yesterday, I went to the Nile and also 12 West, and they were making the lunches for the restaurant buyout program to provide meals to the healthcare workers at Banner, Baywood, and Banner Desert, I believe, a couple of the Banner institutions. I want to thank the program. I think it's great, and they were so thankful, the restaurants were, to have to have the business, and I know the healthcare workers on the other side were very appreciative as well. It's a good thing that we're doing at a very stressful time. I don't know what else is on top of my head, but those were significant for me yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. I think yesterday, Mr. Whitaker and I had the opportunity to go to Banner Baywood and see a lot of those. Maybe those were the meals that you saw assembled, Jen, but 6 different restaurants delivered meals to Banner Baywood yesterday to a very grateful staff. So that was, it's been good to see that program function in our community. Other comments? Go ahead, Jen.
I wanted to make one more. I know we're doing the hydration donation campaign that we kicked off last week. And I just wanted to also encourage those who are contributing to the canned food drive that is also an opportunity to load up those cases of water to provide to the residents. So yes, you can drop it at all the locations identified in the website, but you can also drop it at the canned food drives, your water donations. So thank you.
I didn't know that. Thank you. And several of the city fire stations are on that list as well. So hopefully it's easy to find places to make those donations. If there's nothing else, the only thing I'll add, Council, is I'm glad that this afternoon we'll be filming the first of our Communities of Color forums. This will be with the leaders from the African American community. Next week, I believe Mr. Luna is going to take the lead on a similar video with the larger member communities, including Latino and Asian and Native American communities. So look forward to getting that ready and posted on Channel 11 and possibly posted on social media and possibly Channel 11 going forward. Anything else to discuss on current events? Mr. Brady, what does our calendar look like?
So Mayor Council, we have scheduled another study session a week from today. So we'll see you then. Okay, thank you. Please unmute your microphones. Council, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.